Hey y'all, it's Christy here from Teadoddles. It is time for a Saturday stitch, and today I'm going to cover 3 different stitches instead of one, and that's basically because these stitches are very similar and they get confused a lot as to which one is which. There's actually a 4th one in this category called the puff stitch, but I already have a video for that one, and I will put a link down below for that if you'd like to take a look. In today's video, I'm going to cover the popcorn stitch, the cluster stitch, and the bobble stitch. So all of these have a similar construction, but they can be just there's some slight differences that make them a different stitch. We'll put it that way. And you may see these anywhere from starting with a base of a half double to a double to a treble stitch. I'm going to work with a double stitch for all of these, a double crochet stitch for all of these. So that is what we're doing today. All of these, I believe all of these are found in my crochet along, the Cozy Murder Mystery crochet along that's going on the blog and the Facebook group, which the links will be down below for all of that. So this will cover several stitches in that area. So let's just get started, shall we? So the first one I'm going to do is the popcorn stitch. And I have a base of just double crochet down here just to give me a good base. I'm actually going to put 2 double crochets at the beginning just to give me a border to start with. Now, popcorn stitches are designed to be puffy, right? You have to, all of the stitches are worked into the same space. Some of these are worked over several spaces, but this one is worked into the same space. So if I want a popcorn stitch here, and you can have anywhere from 3 to 7 stitches in a popcorn stitch, depending on what you're doing. I'm going to do 5. I just like the way it stands out. So we're going to do double crochet. So basically you work 5 double crochet, complete double crochets into this one stitch. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so for this one, we're going to take our hook out of that loop, okay? And then we're going to insert 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to insert our hook into the first double crochet we created in that loop. Pick up the loop that we left off of our hook and pull it through that stitch. So that's what makes it stand out for this, with this one, for the popcorn stitch. You don't have to, but I like to put a chain 1 at the top just to get more secure, and for me it just seems like it gives you better spacing between them when you're doing the stitch. It keeps your work from being so tight. The stitch instruction does not tell you to put a chain 1 at the top, but I do. Okay, so now I'm just going to do so something to be aware of when you do these puffy stitches like this. The next stitch sometimes is hidden behind it, so I'm going to put 2 more double crochets, because typically you don't do these back to back because they are so puffy. You typically put some double crochet or whatever your stitch height is in between them. And you can see that that really makes that stand out a lot. I'll look at that from the side. So again, what we do, you put all of your stitches into one stitch. So for this one, I'm going to do 3 double crochet just to show y'all how different it looks from the 5 double crochet one. So we'll just put 3 double crochet in this next stitch. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we've got our 3 double crochet here. Take our hook out of that loop, insert it into the first double crochet and through that loop, and pull that loop through that first double crochet. And then, like I said, I'm always going to put a chain 1 up top. And you can see that that does not stand out near as much as the other one. Y'all, I'm trying to stay out from this shadow. We had to figure out how to do this without having so much of a shadow from my... I don't know how people do that. If somebody's got tips for keeping shadows off of my work, y'all let me know. But there we go. So you can see that that one does not stand out near as much as the one with 5 in it. It has 3. So it just depends on how much. Most people, when they make crochet patterns, it depends on the look they want, to how many they put into it. So I'm going to go ahead and put 2 regular double crochet into the next 2 stitches. If y'all hear a motor in here, I'm sorry. The neighbor just cranked up their loud vehicle. So, all right. So that's the difference between 5 and 3. Now, typically, you don't do 7 in a double crochet. You may see 7 in a treble crochet, but not typically in a double. So, again, let's just show you that this is, we'll put 5 in this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you take your hook out the loop, insert it into that first double crochet and through that loop and pull it through. And there you go. And chain 1. There we go. Now you can really see the difference between the two. So I'm going to finish out this row with the bobble stitch and put a row of double crochet above that, so then I can show you how to do the cluster stitch. All right, so I'll be right back. Okay, I've finished my popcorns, and I've done most of my half double crochet that I'm putting between it. And I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but they usually put basic stitches in between rows of stitches like this because you want to be on the right side of your work when you do any more, so your texture's on the right side of your work. I just figured I'd show how you find that stitch. So I have one more double here to put a half double in. Do that. And now we're over the popcorn stitch. So because I put a chain 1 here, I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to go into this stitch. This is the actual stitch that would be for the popcorn stitch. So, get my yarn straight. I'm going to put a half double right into there. And then I've got 2 more stitches left on the end to put half double in. Like I said previously, the stitch itself does not call for putting a chain 1 over it. That's something I prefer to do. I just like the way it lays better when I do that. And it could have something to do with my yarn tension. So I'm going to chain 2 or 3 and turn my work. And you can see all those bobbles. You can see how much more it stands out with 5 stitches versus the 3, which is, this is the 3 one here. It doesn't have to, kind of have to push it to make it stand out. So it's definitely less of a popcorn if you just do 3 stitches. So now we're going to work on the cluster stitch, which is kind of the reverse of a popcorn or a bobble stitch. as in you're pulling stitches together versus making a 3D. So a cluster stitch is better for creating space in your work versus texture in your work. So I'm just going to put the 2 double crochet on the ends. And now a cluster stitch is usually worked over 3, 4, or 5 double crochets, or 3, 4, or 5 stitches. I typically like to use the odd numbers just because it's easier to create the space in between. Some people call it, you may see it also listed as a 3 double crochet together, 4 double crochet together, 5 double crochet together. I believe that's what I called it in my pattern, but it's also called a cluster stitch. So I'm going to work over 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So since you're going to be joining it together in one stitch basically over that center stitch, you have to account for the stitches you're skipping, or the stitches that you're not technically skipping them, but you have to put in a stitch for those stitches, if that makes sense, to create that space in your work, or your work's gonna draw up like this because you're neglecting those stitches. You're pulling it together. So since I have 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to chain 2 to account for those first 2 stitches. And you'll see better once I show you if you don't know what this stitch is. So we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and then in my first stitch, I'm going to start a double crochet, but I'm only going to pull through the first 2 loops. I'm not going to finish that double crochet. I'm going to leave these on the hook. So that's what you're going to do for all 5 of these stitches. You're going to start a double crochet and pull through the first 2 loops and leave the rest on the hook. Okay? So that's 2. This is 3, 4, and 5. So now I have 6 stitches on my hook. All right, that's the beginning one, or 6 loops on my hook. And then that's the leftovers from all 5 of my double crochets. So I'm going to yarn over and pull through all of the stitches on the hook. All right, so that is a cluster stitch. I'll lay this out so you can see it a little better. See, we joined all 5 of those stitches with 1 stitch at the top. Now, to make up for the 2 on the other side, so technically my chain 2 makes up for 1, 2, and then I've got 1 stitch here on the center where I joined them all together. So I need 2 more chains. 1, 2. And typically that's just written into the pattern that way, but that's why it's there. So you know. So now if I wanted to continue with cluster stitches, what I have to remember, a lot of times you'll see just a basic double crochet or something in between these. But if I want to just continue with cluster stitches, I have to remember that the next 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I still have to account for these 2 in my spacing. So I would chain 2 more. 1, 2. So it's a total of 4 between clusters if you're doing 5 stitches in your cluster. And then I would start with my double crochet again, just working half of that double crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We have 6 stitches on, or 6 loops on our hook, and we pull through all of those. And then chain 2, 1, 2. So there is that spacing there. And it's still going to probably want to be a little tight, depending on your tension in your, when you're crocheting. So you may want to make those chains a little loose if you have tighter tension. It will also kind of balance out with your next row. But if you, mine's a little bit tight, so if you keep those chains looser between it, you won't have that issue. But I'm going to go ahead and finish out this row with the clusters and do another row of half double crochet on top of that. When you do your next row, you just count your stitches. So I got 1, 2 double crochet, 2 chains, 1 in the middle of this, which would be this loop here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 between them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish that out, and then I'll be back to show you the bobble stitch. Okay, again, I wanted to show you where I put the stitch for these when I'm doing that basic stitch between them. When we look at this, there's kind of 2 options going on at the top up there. I always put mine in here because this is where all the stitches are joined, and it just, for me, it makes it not as loose up there. So I put my stitch there, and then I skip this. If you put it there, it just kind of pulls and it loosens it a little more to me, okay? And then I have 2 chains here, so I just chain out. I do my stitch over the chain. I don't go through the chain. 1, 2. That's just my preference. It's easier to do, and I like the way it looks better. Some people like to put theirs through the chain. I don't think either one's wrong. I think that's just a preference. There we go. That's the back side of it. So let me chain 1, 2, 3, turn my work, get my second double crochet in there. I usually put 2 stitches at the end as a border when I do patterns. It just kind of gives you a little border as you go along, instead of starting the stitches right at the end. All right, next we're going to do the bobble stitch. This one is more similar to the popcorn stitch. So there's, differences. So for this one, you kind of do like you do in the cluster, where you do the bottom part of the double crochet. If you're working with double crochet, this one usually uses double and treble crochets. So if you do the bottom part of it, you do all but the last step of the stitch. So if you're doing a double, it's just the bottom half. If you're doing a treble, it's, you do the 2 stitches, and then the last 2 stitches you leave on your hook. So except for this one is spread out over 5 stitches, the bobble stitch is within 1 stitch. Okay, so it's kind of the reverse of a cluster. As you can see, the cluster leaves spaces in between, whereas a popcorn and a bobble stitch will give you texture. But the bobble stitch to me doesn't stand out as much as a popcorn stitch. So I'm just going to show you how that works. I'm going to go into this stitch here. I'm going to do a 5 stitch bobble. They do 3, 4, and 5. You'll see them with different stitches just depending on what they want the look to look like. So I'm going to start a double crochet here and just pull up through the first 2 loops. I'm going to start another one, pull up through the first 2 loops. So that's 2, so we need 3 more. 3, 4, and 5. So again, like the cluster, you have 6 loops on your hook. You're going to pull through all of those. Loop. And that is a bobble stitch, right? And again with this stitch, the same as the popcorn stitch, I like to do a chain 1 on top. I just like the way it lays in my work better. That is not part of this stitch, but that is something that I do anytime I do these stitches. And as you can see, this definitely does not stand out as much as this does, okay? Just kind of gives you a little bit of a puffiness there, as opposed to the popcorn stitch, which really stands out. So I'm going to just do 2 double crochets between these. That is a typical thing when you do this, same as the popcorn stitch, just makes it stand out more. And there you go. You can see, even from the side, my camera will focus. Let's try it over here. There we go. It does not stand out as much as the popcorn stitch. So that is the difference between a bobble stitch and a popcorn stitch. A bobble stitch is the reverse of a cluster, where it's all in one and you're doing half of the stitch and then finishing it all up in one stitch. And cluster is across several stitches and then joined at the top. And then a popcorn stitch, you don't join all the stitches, you join the first one to the last one basically in a popcorn stitch. So those are the differences between the two. I'm going to do one more bobble stitch on camera. We go 1, 2, 3. Oh, my yarn stuck. 4 and 5. There we go. 6 loops on the hook, join through all. I do a chain 1. You don't have to do that. I just prefer it. I feel like it gets my work to lay better. So those are the differences. I'm going to finish out this row and then I'll come back on camera and finish this up. Okay, so again, I wanted to show you where I put my stitch on my basic row. If we look at the top of this, that little space right there, because you can also see this space here. And I don't put it here because it's looser. This, putting it here, is just a more secure place. It keeps your stitches from being loose. And I go into my last 2, double crochet. Something else I wanted to point out is that when you do this stitch, when you do that basic stitch across it, a lot of times this will bow to the front. You can just poke it to the other side. This stitch tends to do that, depending on how you crochet. So you can just punch them to the other side and they'll poke out like they're supposed to on the right side of your work. So let me just turn that over. There we go. And that's why I don't like the bobble stitch as much, because of this, of how it does. It pops out on the wrong side for me every time. And I wind up having to poke it through. I mean, maybe, so that's why I prefer the popcorn stitch or the puff stitch, which the puff stitch I have done a video for already. It's worked differently than these stitches, so you can, I'll have a link down below for that video that you can check out. I also have a pattern, which is linked in that video, for just a basic washcloth. There are lots of, I've actually done a lot of tutorial videos. I think that some of my newer subscribers didn't see those. So I have a playlist called Tutorial Tuesday is what it's called. I'm going to change it to just tutorials. And I'll probably do one for Saturday Stitch. I'm going to try to redo the playlist so it's easier to find what you're looking for, basically. Because I do have some sewing tutorials in there already. For those of you that are interested in sewing tutorials, I will be doing more sewing tutorials for now, I'm doing the Saturday stitch for crochet stitches. I will be doing tutorials on Tuesday for other things like sewing or DIY stuff that I do sometimes. So, but this is actually, that looks, I like the pattern of that together, really. So we got popcorn stitch, cluster stitch, and bobble stitch. Those are things you may see that that work up in a similar way, just sometimes one is opposite of the other, and just doing something slightly different gives you a slightly different look. So I hope y'all enjoyed this, and if you have any questions about any of these tutorials, or if you have if you want to see a Saturday stitch about something, or questions about crochet in general, just let me know in the comments below, and I'll see what I can do to make a video happen for that to answer your questions. Y'all remember to have a life lived creatively, and I'll see y'all in the next video.